This is the solution for the challenge I call Challenge Postal Calculator Helper Methods. All right, it's the first of two challenges, the easier of the two. Hopefully you're able to figure this out on your own. There's not a lot of difficulty here with regards to the actual techniques and the calculations that we need to do. The biggest challenge here is determining how to split this up nicely into a series of methods, which was one of the non-functional requirements. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Well, hold on. Before I get started here, there are so many ways that you could have completed this exercise. I mean, variations on what I'm going to do right now. Yours might even be better than mine. I would say that generally, if you have more smaller methods, each performing one task and doing it really well, then your code is probably better than my code. All right, and I'm fine with that. That's awesome. If you want to post yours if you're a lifetime member, go ahead and post it and let other people see what you've done and compare with other people and their approaches. We're all learning from each other here. I'm sure I can learn something from you at this point. All right, so let's go ahead and get started by creating a new project. Oh, yeah, and by the way, also we have our requirements here, right, in the CS-ASP_035 Challenge 01 code folder. And so I'm going to want to look at this and reference it and then add it into my project as well here in just a moment. So don't let me forget that. All right, so here we go, new project. And we're going to call this, in fact, this is where this would come in handy, as a matter of fact. All right, so one of the non-functional requirements is to name it this name, and instead of typing all that out, I'm just going to copy it. Control-C on my keyboard, and we'll go Control-V here. All right, and click OK. And yes, all these things we've become so accustomed to at this point. I'm going to add a new default web form. Alrighty, and then let's change over to the design view, pop open the toolbox. Let's go ahead and lay out our form first, and then we'll come back and write the logic that we need. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is call this Postal Calculator, and I'm going to forego the styling on this one. It doesn't really matter. Width, I think we had height, we had length, and then we had a series of radio buttons. So here, let's start off with our text boxes. There's one text box, there's another text box, and there's the last text box. And then we need radio buttons. One radio button, 2, 3, and then finally a result label. All right, let's go and start here. Empty this baby out. Great. So we got our result label. Let's start at the top and work our way down. We'll start off with our width text box. Then we'll go with our height text box. And then we'll go with our length text box. And then we're going to go with our radio button. We'll start with ground. If I can spell it right. And here, let's go ahead and change the text. We want this to just say the word ground. Then we'll go air. And go up here to type in air. And then finally, next day. Alrighty, and we want to keep these in a group, so let's go ahead and do that. Group name. Let's call this method group, for lack of a better name. And we'll apply that to each of these. And one of the requirements from the video, it doesn't really say it here on the in our requirements. I guess maybe it does. Once you have the minimum amount of information you need, produce a result on screen. So what we're going to do is anytime there is a change in any of the values, any of the input input text boxes or radio buttons, then we want to do a post back to the server automatically. So hopefully you remember how to do that. It's under the behavior section. We want to turn on auto post back for each of these items. And then the final thing that we want to do is actually create event handlers for each of the postbacks, each of the changed events. So in the case of a text box, it'll be a text changed event. In the case of a radio button, it'll be a radio button checked changed event, I think. It's easy to find it. Here, let's just go over to the Events tab, and you can see that it's already highlighted for me. I'll just double click the blue selection on each of these to create the default names and stubs for each of these controls. Yeah, checked changed, that's what we want. Checked changed, and whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Check change. Okay, I did it anyway. When I just double clicked it, it's the default event. Okay, so far so good. We can get rid of this now, and I don't think we're going to need this very often. Okay, now really the key to this is that each one of these are going to call the same helper method that we created, which we're going to call this, I'm going to call it perform. You know what, I'm going to show you something new. I know here I'm going to go to the very first one, and I know what I'm going to do is whenever somebody types in text, I'm going to call perform changed. And it's like, oh, I don't have that method defined yet. What can I do about this? I'm going to right click and select generate method stub. All right, and you can see that it creates a new method, and it will throw an error, throw an exception. Notice the exception's name, not implemented exception. We'll talk about exceptions and what they are and how they work in an upcoming lesson. They're very important. So you can see that I can create the stub of a new method by merely typing the name of it out and then saying go ahead and generate that method stub. Now in this case, I'm going to move this to the very bottom since they're all going to call the same method here. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this into each of the changed events, like so. And I'm going to show you one other trick at the very end, how we can eliminate the need to do that in this situation. Neat little idea. Okay, so what I typically do whenever I start out on a new application of any consequence is I begin to lay out for myself the outline of the story, just like an author would whenever they go to create a book. And you can sometimes think of this as a creative endeavor. I mean, you have to use your imagination. You bring it to life with your own thoughts and your own typing, okay? It's very much like authoring a book. It's still creative. You have to name things, and you have to call them in a way or name them in a way that they make sense and that they read like a story. So what I typically do is I just start thinking in my mind what I should do first, what I should do second, even before I start writing code. So I write a series of comments that are usually the outline. So the first thing I want to determine is do the values in the text boxes and check boxes even exist? So is there even a selection made for the major ones that I have to have? If not, we can just skip out of this. If they've only filled in the radio button but haven't given us a width and a height, then we can just skip out of this and let them continue on to continue to enter new information. So that's the first gated check that we're going to do there, is just to make sure that we have the data we need to do something meaningful. All right, the next thing that I want to do is we want to determine the volume that we're going to be dealing with here. If it's flat, obviously the length is going to be a 1. However, the width and the height would still be provided for us in text boxes. If it's the width and the length and the height, then it'll give us a cube, and obviously would give us more volume. Okay, so we want to determine, so what is the volume of the package that we're going to ship? Then I'm going to need to determine which radio button was selected, and so which multiplier that I'll be using. So per the requirements, there are 3 different multipliers depending on which of the shipping methods that you use, either 15, 25, or 45, and that'll determine, you multiply that times the volume, and that's how much it will cost to ship that particular item to its intended recipient. Okay, so we're going to say, what is the multiplier? And then once I have the volume and the multiplier, I'll multiply them together, so I'm going to determine the cost, and then finally I'll show the user. And I think that's all I need to do here, right? Now I can farm out some of these responsibilities, and probably will, to help other helper methods. And so let's start with that. Let's go with text boxes and text. Do the text values in the text boxes and checkboxes exist? So what I'd really like to do here is just say if the values exist, I want to create a new method to determine this for me. I'll just assign that to another helper method. Do we have the information we need, yes or no? So I'm going to say if the values don't exist, so exclamation mark, then I'm going to call this values exist method that doesn't exist yet. And but if they don't, then we'll return out of this, and we won't go any further into our application. So obviously the next thing I need to do here is I need to generate a new method stub for this new values exist, and notice that it knows that I need a return value of a Boolean. Okay, so that's my first step. I'm just going to leave that empty for a moment here and continue to flesh out what I'm working on here. So once I know that I have the values I need, then the next thing I need to do is determine the volume. So I'm going to say, can we get the volume? I mean, just because values exist in the text boxes doesn't mean that they typed in logical values. They could type in Bob as the width and Beth as the height, and that wouldn't give us anything real. But do we really have the values? And if we do, what is the volume returned? And so this might be a good application of an output parameter. If you implemented it different than using an output parameter, that's fine. That's great. I have no problem with that whatsoever. I'm going to use an output parameter in this situation just to exercise that particular tidbit of information that we learned in the previous lessons. All right, so I'm going to do this again. And I'm going to call this, kind of like the double dot try parse. I'm going to call this try get volume. So I'm going to follow that same kind of nomenclature. Try get volume. It's going to return back to me a true if it got it and a false if it didn't. But if it didn't return back anything to me, then here again, I think I'm just going to return out of this and just go on about my way. Now, I need to retrieve back the volume as an output parameter. So in order to retrieve it, I'm going to have to create a int volume equals 0. And then I'm going to do something like out volume, like so. All right, so now let's go ahead and right click this and select generate method stub. And now look what it did for me. It knew, based on what I imagined in my mind, the way that I want to call this method that doesn't exist, that's only in my imagination. And so I typed it out the way that I wanted to. I'm fighting IntelliSense while I'm doing that. But one of the payoffs is once I get it to look kind of like what I want it to look like, then I can just right click and say generate the method stub. And notice it figured it out. It knew that I was going to return a bool and that it has an output parameter called volume. Very, very cool. Now I don't like where it put it. Again, I like to keep things kind of in the order in which they appear on the stage, so to speak. But I can continue on. What is the multiplier? So this is kind of the same thing here, except I know that somebody selected at least one of the radio buttons, or else the values exist would have caught it and would have just exited out. So I don't have to use an output parameter in this particular case. I can just do a normal call. So I'll do something like this: double postage multiplier. I think I spelled that right, equals get postage multiplier. Like so. Here again, I don't have what I need. Now this time what I'm going to do is something a little bit different. I can see that there's a little blue dash under the G in the get. All right, and if I were to use my mouse cursor, I could just select this, generate method stub for get postage multiplier, and it would create the method stub just as if I had right-clicked and selected from the context menu. But there's an even easier way to go about this too. Whenever you see that little blue dash pop up underneath the first letter in something you've typed in, what you can do is hit the Control key on your keyboard and then the period, and it will pop open that little helper window and give you options. And if there's more than one option, you can use your arrow keys to select one of them. Then once you have it selected, like this one's selected, it's in yellow, I'll just hit return on my keyboard, and when I do that, it created this private double get postage multiplier. Very cool. But again, I don't like where it's at. I want to move it all the way to the bottom. Cool. All right, so now I just need to determine the cost. I could farm this out, I suppose, to another method, but it's really a simple calculation at this point. Double cost equals the volume times the postage multiplier. And then finally I need to show the user. Now this is something that I might, well, I could farm this out too, but I'm just going to keep this in one little line of code. String.format, your parcel will cost 0 to ship. All right, and we'll go cost there. And since this is a currency value, I'm going to use the :C on it. Okay, so this is the basic outline. I still have some things to fill in here. I need to determine, first of all, if the values exist. So do we have all the data we need to even go and continue on in our little calculation? So this is really easy. I just need to make sure a radio button is selected and at least the width text box and the height text box have some value that's greater than that has some value in it. We'll worry about whether it's a numeric value or something a little bit later, right, in the next call, the try get volume. But for right now, all I need to do is this: if not air radio button dot checked and not ground radio button dot checked and next day radio button dot checked. So if none of those are checked, forgot them, then return false. We can't go on. We don't have enough information to continue on. The values don't exist. This should be checked. Okay. Now, assuming it passed that check, we'll do one more check here. If with textbox.text.trim, remember this whole little technique we use, .length, this will tell me that there's something besides spaces inside of this text box. Now it could be alphanumeric characters. Obviously we're hoping it's a numeric character, but we worry about that later. So if it's greater than 0, then we have something. But if it is 0, if the length is 0, we got a problem here. So if the length is 0 or the height, textbox.text.trim.length is 0. We have to have either one of those. So if either one of those, if either one or those, if that one or that one is 0, then we got problems. We cannot continue on, so we'll return a false, like so. All right, so if we made it through those two checks, then we have to return true at that point. We have the values we need, we can continue on. All right, and the little red squiggly goes away, and everybody should be happy now. The next thing we need to do is try to get the volume. Try volume, and so this should be interesting, right? Let's get rid of that little throw. And the reason that it stubs it out with the throw new not implemented exception is because if we forget and use the generate method stub and then go on about our way and call that method, we want it to remind us, oh yeah, you forgot to actually implement that method. So so this is a little bit tricky, not horrible. We're going to need to retrieve the values from the text boxes and try to parse them into integers. If we can't, then we need to return false. We were unable to get the volume because somebody typed Bob in the width or the height. Okay, so here we go. We need to assign volume some value. That's just one of the things we got to do to satisfy the compiler. So let's go ahead and give it volume equals 0 to start off with. And then we're going to need to get the width and we need to get a height, and we need to potentially get a length. So I'm going to go ahead and just declare all these up front. Don't have to do it that way, but it keeps everything kind of nice and tidy. All right, next up, what we want to do ultimately at the very bottom of this, if we are able to get the values, we're going to return true. But if we're not, then we'll return false. Like so, if we do like an int.tryparse, like so, if int.tryparse, and we pass in the width text box dot text dot trim, and it passes out the width. But if that doesn't work, if we cannot parse that out, if somebody typed in Bob in the width text box, then we want to return false. We were unable to get the volume. Of course, you got to spell return correctly. Next up, if, same little pattern here, if not int.parse, whoops, that's not it. Try parse, there we go, height text box dot text dot trim, and we want to push out the height, then here again we'll return false. All right, everybody's happy. Finally, if not int dot try parse, now we don't have to have the length. If somebody just sends a letter and it's not, it doesn't bulge at all, it's not more than 1 inch tall, then we don't really care about it. It doesn't affect the volume for our purposes in this application. So the length text box dot text dot trim out length. And the only thing we really want to do here is if we were unable to parse that out, we're just going to set length equal to 1. So as you multiply volume and you say, okay, this package is 5 wide and 5 high, or height is 5, and you set the length to 1, it's essentially just 5 times 5 times 1. It's essentially nothing, okay? It's the same as just 5 times 5. So that's why we're going to set that to 1. And finally, we want to return the volume, right? So we're going to set the volume now equal to width times height times the length, like so. And that should work. That should return us back a volume. All right, and then finally we've got to figure out the postage multiplier. And that's going to be a simple case of just looking at each of the checkboxes and returning a value, a double, based on which one was selected. So this is easy. If ground radio button dot checked, then return 0.15, else if air radio button dot checked, then return 0.25, and then else if next day radio button dot checked, then return 0.45, and then finally just if none of those are checked, this should never happen, but let's just go ahead and have fun with it and return a 0. If they didn't enter anything and it somehow got to this point, it should be 0, the multiplier, and then the total price will be 0 when we come back up to here, right? And I think that's all we need to do. Let's go ahead and see if this actually works. And if it does, I have one more little wrinkle I want to show you. Something I haven't showed you yet, and it'll be kind of interesting. So let's start off by just typing 5 in the width. That should create a postback. And let's select ground. That should create a postback. Still nothing to show, but when I give the height a 5, then it says that 5 times 5 times 0.15 should equal $3.75 to ship. Okay, cool. But if I were to increase this and give you a box that's 5 by 5 by 5, how much would it cost? Well, then it would cost $18.75 to ship it ground. How much would it cost to ship it air? $31, and next day $56. Okay, and having shipped things in the past, these numbers aren't so unbelievable. I wonder if they have some easy calculation like this at the post office. All right, I promise one more cool little wrinkle, and that is this. Look at this. They're all pretty much doing the exact same thing here. Do we really need 6 of the exact same things doing the same thing, I think we can get rid of all these. I think we can do it with 1. Now watch this. Here, just to be on the safe side, it's going to need all this extra stuff here if I'm right, and if I'm not right, well then I'll put my tail between my legs and slink out of this video. And we're just going to call this handle change. And then perform. This should be calculation, by the way. I don't like that. I wasn't paying attention. Perform calculation. Calculation. Right. So, perform calculation, like so. And at this point, I'm going to delete all this. Boy, I'm taking a big chance here. I didn't practice this. I'm just doing it off the top of my head here. Now, let's go back to each of our controls here. Select them. And I'm going to change where they're pointed to this handle change method. And if I did this right, we have significantly reduced the amount of code that we got to parse through and understand before we can work with our application here. I really hope this works. I'd be happy if it does. All right, so let's put a 5 in there. All right, let's put a 6 in here. And then let's choose air. It worked, okay? So the moral of the story is this. Despite the fact that you have even different controls, the fact that they share that same method signature and that, you know, they're all pretty much generating the same template code, I can just say, since it's just a property of the control, to say whenever that event is fired, use this method. It was just generating that method stub anyway for us. Why do we care whether it's given this nice big full name of air radio button underscore check changed with all this junk passed into it, or if we just change it to something that is small and tidy and makes sense. And now look at how small our code base is. We were able to reduce down about, I don't know, 30 lines of code with that little change. In fact, we could even get rid of this and just, hey, just stick all this in there too, for that matter. Let's go one step further here. Get rid of that. Just stick that in there. I think it'll still work. And we won't even make the call to perform calculation. In fact, I'm so confident this will work, I'm going to go ahead and comment all this out. I'm getting cocky. All right, so let's go 6 and 6 and air. Wow, look at that. It's working. I'd have to verify those results, but I'm pretty sure they work. So I can just remove all this stuff and remove that call. And there you go. That's a pretty compact little piece of code there. All right, so that is the solution, plus a little extra. No extra charge. Hopefully you were able to understand this lesson. The next one is really going to be hard for you. So I wanted to start with an easy one. This is relatively easy. And then you're going to push to the next one. The next one took me over 2 hours to come up with. And I don't know how long it's going to take me to solve it on camera, but it's not for the faint of heart. But you need to push yourself at this point and begin to challenge yourself with some of these ideas. You're going to borrow from the ideas that you learned in this lesson, or at least in this challenge, and just apply them on a larger scale to that challenge. Okay? So we'll see you there. Thanks.